it's a seamless process where the co-teachers are working together to appropriately modify or adapt instruction to meet the needs of the students. They know their students well, and it is something that benefits all students. Where we are running into more challenges are things like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language, those sorts of very specialized services, and students with autism spectrum disorder. We're also working to look at psychological services, counseling. Those services are already in place in terms of those counselors reaching out, but in terms of what an IEP says or what the service model says on an IEP that we cannot replicate, that's where those discussions have to happen. Whether we can even have a remote IEP meeting is still unclear, whether we can get the right people involved in that meeting. So parents, particularly parents of students with very significant disabilities, are obviously really concerned. And we're working hard to try to figure this out, but there is no easy, quick way to do this. It's not this kind of service, and you have to remember it's 17% of our kids have diagnosed disabilities. It's over 800 students in our district. This type of educational service doesn't lend itself to doing it through a computer. And so we're really trying to work hard to plan this, but we're not just standing still. I think for sure the majority of our students with disabilities will be seeing similar instruction to what they had been seeing with co-teaching. It's just the small percentage of students in our sub-separate classrooms, their teachers have been in contact with them, but what the learning will look like long-term is another question. When we were looking at a 2-week or a 3-week period, I think how you plan is different than if it's going to be an extended period. And it looks pretty clear that this is going to be an extended closure. I don't have any announcements at this point, but I think parents should prepare to be out through the end of April vacation. At this point, we'll await further guidance from the state around how things are going, but we're and preparing for a more extended closure than was first announced. Other questions people may have?
I do.
Chris is with us.
If I can. Hi. So Judy, when you say there's some conflicting guidance between the state and the federal government and we're waiting for clarity, I realize that's a broad statement on a whole host of issues. For me personally, and I don't know how the rest of the committee feels, I would certainly encourage you and your team to, if there are issues on which you feel strongly about what is right, then I think that's what you should do. And because I wonder about what the consequences are for delay. So here's a perfect example. We said it's unclear if you can hold IEP meetings remotely. We're holding a school committee meeting remotely right now. IEP meetings obviously have a few more people in them, but if it's the right thing to do to try to hold that meeting and people are available, I'm thinking of IEP meetings for students for which maybe testing had already been completed and it was a meeting that maybe would have been held this week or last week, but wasn't for obvious reasons. Is there an opportunity to hold those meetings and make progress on some of those issues for students? Because what's the consequence if we don't? And so I'm using that just as an example since you mentioned it. I think if there are any things for which you and the team really feel a decision is the right decision because it's in the best interest of students and you have the resources to do it, and that maybe there's some reluctance because guidance from the state or federal government is ambiguous, to the extent the school committee can lend you some sort of support, I would encourage you to share that with us, because I certainly want us to be leveraging whatever technology and tools and resources we have to make progress on the things that we know we have to make progress on, because those kids are not going to go away. Those IEP needs are not going to go away. And I sort of imagine a backlog of just stuff to be done whenever we return to normal, whenever the heck that's going to be. So I support you. I mean, I guess my message is I would like you not to feel like you're stuck in quicksand because Betsy DeVos says one thing and the commissioner of DESE says another, because you and your team know your students and there may be some things for which you feel like we should just be doing this. And I would certainly support you if you have that intuition.
No, I appreciate that. I think we're focused less on compliance and more on sort of the practical delivery of services right now. And before we convene any IEP meetings, that's a legal obligation once we agree to provide those services. We just want to make sure we'll be able to. And in the event that some of the providers become ill, we need to identify backup providers and so forth. I mean, it is more complicated. The other issue is some of this will have to get negotiated with our unions because um, how people are providing services, at what time they're providing services, and how they're participating in remote meetings, having some people required to participate and others not. um, it's all some of the logistics that are sort of behind the scenes that we need to iron out now that this looks like highly likely it's going to be a more extended closure. So yeah, I appreciate the support on that, and there's a recognition that what we're trying to do is prevent regression for all of our students, but um, that we will need to provide some additional services certainly once we reopen, particularly for students with disabilities. And so sort of provisioning for that and budgeting for that and hiring for that is going to be a whole other discussion at some point. And my deep concern still lies with the families who have children at home with very significant disabilities, with no respite and no in-home supports. And so it's got to be very difficult for those families. Many of those children are year-round students typically in summer programs and throughout the school year, and now they're home for weeks at a time, and it's a tremendous source of stress for those families, especially if they're concerned about their children regressing. And so we're working really hard with other districts and with state to try to provision for that.
So I think
Any
what
other
Chris
questions?
is asking is similar to what I was asking before, Judy, which is, can we continue to reach out to families? Can we continue to do whatever it is we think we can do?
Well,
right
that's our
and
most
we support you doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, that's our most important priority right now, is making sure that every family feels our deep care and concern and engage them. The other thing that parents should expect is later this week is a survey on how distance learning is going, some suggestions for improvement, some validation for the things that we think might be going well. And so we'll take that feedback and plan. The whole evaluator groups, all supervisors and evaluators will meet tomorrow. We'll get their feedback remotely. We'll get their feedback from their teachers and in their own classes, if they're teachers, how things are going. And so I hope people know we are all continuing to work incredibly hard behind the scenes. And some of the answers are just not apparent yet, but we're going to continue to work hard on it.
Did I mute myself?
Have we lost you, Michelle?
Yeah, I was getting a message from Dave's about the audio. Sorry about that for a minute. We're just checking on making sure we were actually broadcasting. So does anybody else have any other questions for Dr. Evans about status of the district, distance learning, before we move on to the MOA?
I would just say that I can see that we're broadcasting live and I can hear the audio on the computer right there. So
okay, great. Thanks,
very
Brian.
clear.
Thanks, Brian.
MOA?
MOA. So first order of business is to consider the MOA. I've sent you a draft. As you know, the town has asked for the support of 2 of our nurses to work with public health for 2 weeks to communicate remotely with town residents who've tested positive for COVID-19. I'd be happy to have Lori answer any questions about the MOA itself, but what we're looking is for your authorization to have, Michelle, do you want you or Zena to be authorized on this one?
I can sign it.
Okay.
On behalf of the school committee.
Okay, so questions for Lori, concerns?
So I do have a simple question, I think. It says in the MOA, if the workload exceeds 20 hours per week, this MOA will be nullified. I was just trying to understand what that meant practically. Because I could picture them doing 20 hours of work and then they go over to 21. Does it nullify? What does it mean to be nullified if they do 21 hours of work?
So what it means is we have partnered with the town, and those two nurses, Deb Provenzano and Nancy Boyle, have made the commitment to support the town as best they can, given the situation. And as we're all very well aware, this changes minute by minute. So when it becomes too big for the school to support, then we would have to revisit it. But there's no calculation of 21 and a half hours. It's when it becomes bigger than us.
Okay.
And we just want to make sure that because they are in that same unit, that they have the same requirements as their peers.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That was the only thing that was confusing to me in the MOA.
Yeah.
Karen.
I got a question, Michelle.
Yeah, Karen did too.
Oh,
You're next.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Karen.
So I was just noticing that the date is through April 3rd. Oh, wait, let me just see. Yes.
True. It is. It's the same as the other MOAs.
Okay. And so I guess these will be updated as well based on the information coming out of Governor Baker's conference?
Correct. So in the next, when we learn more, then we're going to have to sit down and revisit the many MOAs that we have outstanding, and we're going to have to correct them to, show what it is we're doing from that point on.
Which means that we as a committee also have two things to consider, which is that we could, you could authorize me as chair of the school committee or Zena as our contracts liaison to just approve any MOAs as long as they are just extending the same agreements that we already have, that or we can meet and approve each one. So that's something else we should consider today while we're here. Chris, did you have a question?
I do. No mention in the MOA of compensation. So what is the compensation for the work? What's the source of compensation?
So the nurses fall under the Unit A contract. They're already compensated as teachers.
So in other words, what this is doing is it's changing their work assignment at the end of the day. That's really all this is about, and for a fixed amount of time.
Yes.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
And were these two nurses the ones who stepped up and were willing to do this? Was this volunteer or were they assigned to this?
Yeah, so Jen Markham has been meeting every day. They have a meeting and talking through the many issues. So it was shared that this was a request from the town. They problem solved together. And Jen is ensuring that the two schools that are left vacant will have the support needed as we move through these weeks as well. So these two.
Only these two named nurses that are part of this MOA.
Yes. And so we have one who's leaving, is from Morocco. The other one is from Ambrose. So they're vacating those duties technically. And the other nurses will work together to make sure that the needs of those two schools are met.
Thanks, Laurie. Any other questions? Then I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the MOA between the school committee and Winchester Education Unit A regarding dated March 20th.
And may I suggest Brian add to his motion, we authorize Michelle to sign on our behalf.
I agree.
I'll
All in the same
second that.
motion.
So I second that motion. Do we need a roll call?
We do need a roll call.
I'll go first. Aye.
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 Aye. And then can we discuss really quickly before we end the meeting regarding future MOAs? Karen already brought up the issue that our MOA is going to be out of date. We can choose to designate myself or Zena to extend those MOAs as already written. So without changes, we could just vote to have one of us authorize the extension of those. Or the other option would be is that we could meet again like this. Thoughts on that?
I'd opt to meet again.
I concur.
Any other? Zena
Don't
and
understand why we'd have to meet just to extend the date. No terms are being changed. I mean, you can authorize Michelle, I don't care, but it just seems like a waste of time. Talk about the days.
It would be really helpful for us if you would approve authorization of the existing MOAs for a set period of time in the event that several of you become ill and we're not able to meet. It would allow us to extend them with the units. But I understand you're wanting to meet again if there are any significant changes.
I guess the only thing I would say is if we are required to revote this because we need to extend the date, that in and of itself is a significant change, because we're talking about going till April 3rd until, I mean, what if the date is June 7th? I think that's something even though it would be the same terms, I think it would be something we'd want to get together and discuss. So if we're talking about 3 days, I think I feel differently. Since the date could be significant, I feel like we should meet, is why I would argue that we should meet for any MOA extension.
I concur.
Could you feel comfortable, Brian or Chris, authorizing a 2-week extension or a 3-week extension? So you could authorize us to extend this until April 26th, if there are no further changes.
I think, I guess I have a bit of a concern as well. So I have to agree with Brian on if we're doing, depending on the length of the extension, if we have to discuss some of the content, like how distance learning appears with Unit A, then I think we should be able to come back together and discuss that before we sign an extension that goes on for a long time.
would anybody be comfortable extending it to the state mandated closure date
Of April 7th?
of April 7th?
Well, that's only a weekend, so it's already April 3rd.
Yeah, so
It's
it's
Monday.
basically
Or
no
if
change.
that is extended.
I'm totally fine extending all of the MOAs through the 7th, which is basically no change. And if you would like a motion to authorize us to extend them, you're signing them to extend them all through the 7th, that's no material change.
I agree.
I agree with that.
Is that useful to you right now, Judy, and then to prepare for a longer, or would you rather just prepare for a longer extension?
So this is one of those areas where you need to authorize Zena to do the negotiations, and we can fill you in an executive session on what the recommendation is before you before you discuss in open session whether or not you're going to extend or agree to any contract that MOA gets proposed. I'm just looking for a fallback in the event that we can't get a quorum or we are unable to discuss this. It's not my intention to make any substantive changes to the MOAs. At this point, none of us know what's coming up, but it sounds as though we have at least 3 members who are not comfortable with this, so I'll drop the request.
I think we also have a meeting. We had discussed a meeting on Monday, March 30th at 6 p.m. So we'll meet again in a week, and maybe we'll have more clarity by March 30th about some of these issues to be able to revisit some of this.
Sure.
Michelle, can I ask you a question about that meeting?
Sure.
Did you want to move that to Tuesday, the 31st, given that it seems unlikely, once we know for sure there'll be no election on that date?
So we could do that just for consistency for communication to the town that our school committee meetings are usually on Tuesday evenings.
That was what I was thinking.
Michelle, I like that idea a lot. Once you get our absolute confirmation, like through Mary Ellen, just again for consistency, I think that would be good.
Yeah.
I like the consistency of March 31st as well.
I do have a question for Judy, just before we wrap this one up, if I can. I saw there was an email that went out that said town fields are closed. And I know in Medford, some playgrounds on public property have been basically taped off. Do we have a sense about how the playgrounds are being used at our elementary schools? And are we taking any measures to communicate that those are off limits out of concern for the stability of the virus on contact surfaces? That was on my list to just go around and look, and I hadn't gotten to it yet.
All town play